welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're embarking on quite a journey, I think. We're looking into a piece of source material that one of you actually sent in.
Oh, interesting. Always good when listeners contribute.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's an article called UK Chaos and Free Speech Concerns. And, well, it offers a pretty robust and, sometimes quite unsettling look at some major issues in UK society right now.
Okay.
We're talking policing, free speech, immigration, all seen through, let's say, a very particular lens.
Right.
This piece really throws down the gauntlet, doesn't it? It takes a very specific and I'd say highly critical stance. Makes some pretty big arguments about the state of things in the UK.
It absolutely does. And I think what's immediately striking here is how this source isn't just, reporting events. It's carefully picking and choosing them, weaving them together to build this really powerful argument.
Yeah.
So we need to be upfront, I think. Its tone is definitely critical, undeniably opinionated. It feels much more like what we'd call a polemic than, say, neutral reporting. It's a polemic,
right,
designed to provoke.
Exactly. Not just inform, but persuade, maybe even stir things up. It consistently frames events through this very specific, often populist viewpoint to get that effect.
Got it.
So our mission today in this deep dive is really to explore the specific arguments and the observations presented in this particular source. We want to understand its viewpoint on what it sees as these big societal challenges in the UK.
Okay.
The article strongly argues, it really pushes the idea that institutions are compromised, that basic civil rights are eroding, and that current immigration policies are actively fragmenting communities. It's less a news report.
And more like a commentary.
Yeah, exactly. A comprehensive, persuasive commentary on what the author views as a society in distress.
That's a really crucial distinction to make upfront, understanding it's a polemic. And it certainly doesn't pull any punches right from the start.
No, it doesn't. So let's kick things off by diving into how the article portrays policing and public safety. Because honestly, this is where some of its most startling claims come out. It talks about citizens describing being arrested for their own safety. That phrase alone, it just immediately grabs you, right? It sounds quite alarming.
It does.
And the author uses that, it seems, to suggest a really profound shift in what the police are actually doing. What's the article's deeper argument there?
Well, the article really leans on that specific claim. It uses it to paint this picture where the whole definition of policing has fundamentally changed.
Changed how?
It argues that law enforcement isn't primarily about protecting citizens from crime anymore. Instead, it's become this institution focused on managing optics, making sure people comply with institutional rules, and often the article implies it's about managing risk or even, cover-ups. And it connects this to anecdotal stuff, contrasting police resources may be spent on, say, catcalling stings with what it describes as this alleged indifference to really serious crimes like grooming gangs or underage marriage.
So it's highlighting not just what police are doing, but maybe more importantly, what they're not doing and what that might mean.
Precisely.
And it isn't just the author saying this, right? The article brings in a really telling detail. It quotes an officer who apparently admits that policing now is mostly bureaucracy, paperwork, risk management.
Right. That quote is quite something.
Yeah, this officer apparently describes themselves as social workers, counselors, and firemen instead of actual crime fighters.
Yep.
That really seems to highlight a systemic issue, doesn't it?
It does.
So given that admission, how does the article suggest this change impacts public trust? What are the sort of long-term implications the author is hinting at?
That officer's quote is definitely a linchpin in the article's argument. It acts as this kind of internal validation for the critique. It suggests that when the focus shifts away from those core law enforcement duties to these other roles, or roles that maybe aren't typically police work, that fundamental social contract between the police and the public starts to, erode.
Makes sense.
The article contends that this perceived change in purpose fosters this deep sense of abandonment among citizens. They feel like their main concerns, safety, serious crime, are being sidelined. And the implication is that this disconnect can lead to a real breakdown in trust. Communities might be less likely to cooperate, more likely to view the police with suspicion, seeing them as, agents of bureaucracy rather than protectors.
Yeah.
And the article suggests this has really profound long-term consequences for social cohesion and the rule of law itself.
Okay, so if policing is seen as shifting its focus, what about, just speaking out, The article suggests a similar kind of erosion when it comes to free speech and protest. It highlights several examples that, if they're accurate, are quite concerning. It talks about people apparently being arrested for seemingly minor things or symbolic actions.
Like what?
Things like saying they love bacon, holding English flags, or voicing anti-immigration opinions. These are very specific details. They certainly stick with you. The article uses them to make a powerful point, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The article's strategy here seems to be drawing a direct line between these incidents, even if they seem quite different on the surface.
How so?
It presents these arrests not as just isolated events, but as symptoms of a sort of systematic erosion of free expression in the UK.
Okay.
The author wants to show that a wide range of public speech, especially speech that challenges, prevailing narratives or government policies, is increasingly being policed and suppressed, all under the guise of maintaining public order.
Right.
It's a deliberate rhetorical move, really, designed to illustrate the shrinking space for dissent.
And it's quite a wide net the author casts, isn't it? It's not just one side of the political spectrum.
No, not at all.
From those seemingly minor statements to direct activism, the article claims the government is cracking down on both right-wing protests and environmental groups, like Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, it mentions both.
So the author frames this as evidence that all dissent, whether it's coming from the left or the right, is under threat. What's the common thread the author's trying to weave here? How does it connect these ideologically opposed groups into one argument about free expression?
Well, what's quite insightful, or at least how the article presents it, is how it synthesizes these really varied events, from bacon comments to environmental activism. It pulls them into this cohesive argument about a universal threat to free speech.
Okay.
By highlighting crackdowns on both right-wing groups and activists like Just Stop Oil, the author turns what you might otherwise see as maybe isolated incidents or even, legitimate responses to public disruption into this single issue of governmental intolerance for any kind of dissent.
I see.
The common thread, according to the source, is this overarching desire by institutions to suppress public challenges to the status quo, no matter where that challenge comes from ideologically. This approach definitely encourages you to think critically about how public order laws might impact civil liberties across the whole political spectrum.
So it's less about the cause of the protest, according to this article, and more about the state's perceived reaction to any challenge. That suggests a pretty fundamental reevaluation of civil liberties in the UK, at least from this source's perspective.
That seems to be the core argument, yes.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the article also delves into some pretty sensitive territory when it talks about religious and cultural tensions.
Right.
It brings up the situation in Leicester specifically. Describes how residents reportedly hear the Islamic call to prayer 5 times a day from, I think it said, 70 mosques.
That's the detail it uses.
While, in contrast, church bells are restricted. Now, that detail immediately makes you sit up and take notice. What's the deeper symbolic message the article's trying to convey here, beyond just, noise levels?
Yeah, that specific example from Leicester is incredibly potent within the article's narrative. It really functions as a powerful symbol.
Symbol of what?
Well, the article isn't just talking about sound ordinances, right? It's using this localized cultural marker, the amplified call to prayer, versus the reported restriction on church bells to represent a much bigger narrative. A narrative we see globally, actually, about perceived cultural imbalance and, displacement.
Okay.
The article uses this to suggest that native customs, established traditions, are being restricted or sort of downplayed, while certain imported practices are not only allowed but actively amplified. This framing is designed to evoke a sense of cultural shift and, crucially, to perhaps foster resentment among people who feel their traditional way of life is being marginalized. It's presented as a symbolic reordering of cultural prominence.
So this specific example becomes like a microcosm for a much larger argument about national identity and changing cultural landscapes.
Exactly.
What other details does the article maybe use to build on this perception of an uneven playing field or this perceived reordering of cultural priorities?
Precisely. The article isn't just observing, it's actively arguing that this perceived shift isn't accidental. It suggests it's indicative of a broader pattern where certain elements of native British culture are seen as being sidelined or maybe deemed less important by the powers that be, while other practices are actively prioritized or allowed without similar restrictions. This feeds into the article's overall theme of a loss of identity, a sense of dispossession among some parts of the population. The power of that Leicester example really lies in its ability to quickly and frankly emotionally convey the author's argument about this perceived reordering of cultural values and symbols. It suggests a fundamental change in the fabric of British society, according to this source.
Okay, let's turn now to immigration. The article presents this as another major flashpoint, something leading to significant public backlash.
Yes, it's a central theme.
And this source makes some really striking claims about how migrants are treated compared to locals. For instance, it details incidents where migrants allegedly enter homes unlawfully.
Hmm.
And what's particularly jarring here is the claim that the citizens are sometimes arrested instead of the alleged offenders.
That's a strong claim.
It is, and it further details a case where a suspect was apparently released and even allowed to work in food delivery despite some serious allegations against them. What other evidence does the article present to back up this argument about unequal consequences? How does it structure these points?
Well, the article meticulously collects these kinds of claims to build this powerful narrative, a narrative about immigration being largely unmanaged, creating what it describes as a kind of two-tiered system.
Two-tiered.
Yeah. It argues that local citizens are perceived as bearing a disproportionate cost, both in terms of like personal safety and community resources. The incident you mentioned where citizens are allegedly arrested while migrant offenders are not, or are released quickly, maybe even allowed to work, that serves as a key piece of evidence within this polemic. It's used to illustrate this perceived inequality.
Got it.
And furthermore, the article highlights the issue of hotels being converted into refugee centers. It claims this displaces booked guests and causes significant resentment in local communities.
Right.
Each of these anecdotes is presented not just as an isolated incident, but as a deliberate illustration of the article's underlying theme. That migrants, in this particular narrative, often get state protection, benefits, and maybe face fewer repercussions for certain actions compared to locals. And this, the article argues, fuels public backlash and this sense of injustice.
The author clearly wants to show a stark contrast in how different groups are treated under the law or perceived to be treated.
That seems to be the goal, yes.
How do these individual claims like the food delivery detail or the hotel conversions, how do they cumulatively add up to the article's overall argument about a societal breakdown, a sense of betrayal among locals as it's presented here?
These claims are absolutely crucial to the article's emotional pull, its persuasive power.
That's so.
They serve as these specific, tangible examples that the author uses to connect abstract policy concerns to concrete, everyday impacts on citizens' lives.
Okay.
By detailing incidents where individuals allegedly face unequal consequences or where local resources seem to be reallocated at the expense of established communities, the article evokes this really strong sense of betrayal, of perceived unfairness. It suggests that the very institutions meant to protect citizens are failing them, or maybe even worse, actively working against their interests. These anecdotes aren't just reported, they're strategically placed to build this cumulative case, reinforcing that broader narrative of societal breakdown, where traditional values, the well-being of the native population, are being undermined. And this is how the polemic fuels that sense of urgency and maybe even justification for the public backlash it describes.
Interesting. But despite all these concerns, the article doesn't just focus on the problems, does it? It also highlights what it sees as this rising tide of public resistance.
That's right, it shifts focus there.
It portrays locals continuing to demonstrate, even with heavy police presence and counter-protests sometimes. And it often emphasizes that they insist they're not far right, but simply protective of their communities, their children.
Yes, that framing is important.
It really emphasizes the sort of grassroots nature of the pushback the article is describing.
Indeed. This section is really where the article moves from critique to framing the emergence of a kind of counter-movement.
A counter-movement.
Yeah, and it's a deliberate act of rebranding, you could say. By emphasizing that protesters are not far-right, the article tries to legitimize their actions, broaden their appeal beyond maybe any fringe elements. It presents these individuals as just ordinary citizens, driven by genuine concern for their families, local culture, national safety, rather than by, extremist ideologies. That's a really crucial rhetorical move. It positions them as defenders of fundamental values against what the article portrays as systemic overreach and neglect.
So this is where the article moves from critique towards maybe even a call to action. framing this resistance as defending community and identity.
It certainly seems that way.
The author highlights events like September 13th, which is framed as a major free speech festival, almost a turning point, where ordinary English citizens will push back against this perceived censorship and neglect. How does the article position these acts of resistance? Is it like a potentially transformative moment? What's the narrative it's building?
It definitely frames events like that Free Speech Festival as pivotal moments, almost like a collective awakening.
Right.
It's a narrative of empowerment, you see, where ordinary citizens are portrayed as collectively recognizing these perceived institutional failures and deciding, okay, we need to act. By explicitly calling it a free speech festival, the author connects this growing activism to a universal value, which further legitimizes it in their narrative.
I see.
The article builds this story where these grassroots protesters aren't just reacting to specific policies anymore, but are fundamentally challenging the established institutions. They're aiming to reclaim a sense of agency, protect what they view as essential national and cultural identity.
So it positions them as the heroes.
Essentially, yes. They become the heroes of its unfolding narrative, bravely pushing back against this perceived tide of societal erosion.
So it's a narrative of empowerment. Ordinary citizens reclaiming their voice despite institutional pressures. Okay, let's zoom out a bit then. Let's bring the discussion back to the article's overall structure, its narrative. It's really consistent, isn't it?
Very consistent.
The commentary repeatedly contrasts ordinary citizens versus institutions, the police, the government, even the media.
That dichotomy is key.
Yeah, think about it. Citizens protecting homes versus migrants allegedly breaking in.
Yeah.
Citizens arrested for speech versus offenders treated leniently. Police described as bodyguards for migrants, not protectors of locals. What's the author's ultimate message here, tying all these threads together through this consistent contrast?
Well, the ultimate message, as we've kind of explored throughout this, is woven through that stark citizens versus institutions dichotomy, which is, frankly, a hallmark of many populist polemics.
Right.
The article argues that the political and cultural elites who operate within these institutions are actively undermining native British identity, and at the same time, silencing any form of dissent through laws, through public pressure.
Okay.
The consistent thread is this idea that the very institutions that are supposed to protect citizens are instead complicit in what the author sees as the erosion of societal values, of fundamental civil liberties.
So it's a full indictment.
Pretty much an indictment of the entire establishment, viewed through this very specific cultural and political lens.
So this isn't just a critique of specific policies then. It's presenting a whole narrative worldview, claiming a fundamental breakdown of trust and purpose between the people and their governing structures.
That's a good way to put it.
How does this broader analysis connect to, or maybe echo, larger global discussions that we see playing out today?
Oh, it definitely echoes broader global debates. This deeply critical perspective mirrors situations where populist movements often challenge the established narratives around things like immigration, multiculturalism, free speech restrictions. They frequently frame these issues not just as policy debates, but as existential threats to national identity, sovereignty, traditional cultural values.
Right, the stakes are raised.
Exactly. And that citizens versus institutions narrative is a really powerful tool in these contexts because it simplifies complex issues into a very clear us versus them dynamic.
Yep.
It fosters this strong sense of common grievance, shared purpose among its target audience. It taps into anxieties about rapid social change, a perceived loss of control. And it's a narrative that resonates far beyond the UK, reflecting a wider global sentiment where many people feel unheard or unrepresented by their established leadership.
Wow, okay.
That's it.
We've really gone deep into this particular commentary today, uncovering its specific arguments about UK society.
We have.
You've covered its critical view of policing, the perceived cultural imbalances it highlights, the concerns it raises about free speech, its specific narrative around immigration, and this rise of grassroots resistance it describes. It's certainly a perspective that gives you, the listener, a lot to think about. Prompts a reevaluation, maybe, of how these big societal shifts are interpreted and presented.
And that's precisely the point of engaging with sources like this one, isn't it? Understanding how an argument is constructed, the specific examples it chooses to focus on, the overarching story it builds that's just as crucial as understanding the events themselves. So this raises, I think, an important question for you listening right now. In a world just awash with information, so many viewpoints out there, how do these types of deeply critical, often polemical narratives influence public discourse? And maybe more importantly, what does it mean for you to critically evaluate the lens, the perspective through which these really significant societal events are presented and interpreted?
Hmm.
It invites you to consider not just what is being said, but why it's being said in that particular way and what effects that specific framing might be aiming to achieve.